All right, so another episode, 2 days in a row. We're
Justin at the beginning of every episode.
We're
back for another episode.
Yep. I got to work on my intros and my exits. You know
What's up, YouTubers?
Yeah. I can't make myself do that. Right? Yeah. So we got Mandy Gunasekara and Surya, her husband over here, that's wanting to stay off camera. Sorry, man.
Lurking in the shadows.
Yeah.
He's the Wizard of Oz, man.
He's good at that.
Is.
Yeah.
He is.
That's good. That's really good.
It's a nice way to put it, too. I mean, that's what he is. I've known you guys now for a couple of years coming up. And, so tell us a little bit about your background. We'll get into kind of all the different areas where you guys have gotten involved, and you in particular, and kind of what your political future is. But kind of tell us a whole background, if you can, on who you are, where you came from, and kind of we'll get into the forward-looking stuff.
Yeah, you want the beginning? I'm a military brat. So, my dad, active duty Air Force, grew up moving all around the Southeast mostly, and then abroad in Korea for 4th and 5th grade. But I'm from Mississippi, so all my family lives in Decatur, Mississippi. And I ended up becoming very interested in the intersection of news and politics. And so
how old were you?
I was 10th grade, because there's this, it's not a beauty pageant, but it's called, it's a junior miss. And so I was gearing up for that my junior year. And I remember having these long conversations with my mom, reading articles and then talking about it with her. And I became very interested in who writes these articles and why do they say these things and what's behind it? How do you cultivate that perspective on a variety of issues, not just to be able to talk about it on stage in front of lots of people, but deeper than that. So I got very interested, and I studied communications undergrad at Mississippi College, and then I went to Ole Miss for law school, where I met the Wizard of Oz. And then we ended up going to DC. I had done internships during undergrad, and I got very interested and attracted to this energy that's in Washington, DC. I mean, it truly is the hub of the democratic process, and we can talk about if it's broken or not, or corrupted or co-opted, and it is in all sorts of different ways, but it still works. And if you're willing to meaningfully engage in it, you can make a big difference. And I was very attracted to that.
Did you go to law school with the intention of going into politics?
I did, with the intention of going to Washington, D.C. Okay. And actually, it was really odd for me to say that. I remember people asking, because most people go to law school to practice law.
Well, I did. I had some people in law school that were like they'd have us intro ourselves sometimes in the class, and they'd be like, I'm so-and-so. I'm going to be a congressman in 5 years. And I was always like, what? Dang, dude, I'm trying to figure out what class I'm taking next semester. I have no idea what I wanted to do. So I wish I would have been more focused on what I wanted to do, but I had no freaking idea, man.
Is the Wizard of Oz a lawyer too? Am I the only one in the room who's not a lawyer?
Yes.
Yeah, you're totally outnumbered.
Wow.
3-1.
Yeah.
3-2-1.
You know what I don't have?
Student loan debt.
You know what? Me neither.
Oh, I got a shit ton of it.
So is there a special kind of law that you study if you're going to go into politics?
No.
Or is it just general law with no kind of super specialization? I don't even know if that's I don't know anything about law school.
Law school is like law school. You can take certain elective classes, but you're the guest. I'll stay out of it. Go ahead.
No, I mean, I'm curious about your experience as well. I ended up taking classes from the professors I liked because I did the best, and I was really interested. Probably there's a class called administrative law, and what I ultimately ended up going into when I was working at the Environmental Protection Agency, it explains how laws are passed, and then that authority is passed on to agencies like EPA or Department of Energy or Interior, how that law is interpreted, turned into regulations, and then the relative goals are supposed to be fulfilled. And so there's a class called administrative law, and then ocean and coastal law, which gets into some of the environmental laws that ended up being a big part of what I was working on, both in the Senate and then obviously at EPA. And so I took those classes, but I really only took them because I had great relationships with the professors, and I ended up being a research assistant to one of them. And that's how I approached law school.
Oh, mine was way different. Mine was survive and get out of here as soon as possible. Who has the highest GPA average? I'm taking it. That was it. That was the extent of my research. Was I want the highest GPA I can get.
Where'd you go to school?
The easiest way I could get. South Texas, here in Houston.
Okay.
See, I also went to Ole Miss, and I went to my undergraduate was at Mississippi College, which is it's a Christian school, and so it's a little more structured than most college experiences. Like I lived on campus all 4 years. I'd never lived in an apartment and had that type of lifestyle in my undergraduate years. So then when I got to college, it was a little bit more freedom. A little bit more independent living. And then I happened to be in Oxford, Mississippi. And one thing we do really well are social events. And so I just approached law school. I wasn't too concerned about being the top percentage of my class. I knew I wasn't going to be competing for those law firms, and they look at that. I knew I wanted to go to Capitol Hill. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I still thought I may want to go and be in the journalism space. And part of going to law school was to figure out a better way to break down the issues and then be able to communicate that. So that was my initial goal. But I knew where I wanted to be. I knew I wanted to be on Capitol Hill doing something and making a difference, but I wasn't quite sure what that difference was ultimately going to be. So I had a very casual approach to law school. And I had an amazing time. I met my husband. We met some of our best friends that we still keep up with. And we had the Grove to go to every other Saturday when we had home football games. So I had a fun time. And a lot of people will ask, should I go to law school? I'm like, well, here's my biased view because of this great experience I had. That certainly isn't everyone. Some people, it's a grind and it's not pleasant.
So what was the first thing you did after law school?
After law school, I worked for Lululemon.
Okay.
It was 2010, and it was not a great year to be a newly minted attorney. And we moved. I had gotten barred in Mississippi because you can take the bar early if you only take pass-fail credits, which I did my last semester because I'd taken some summer classes. So I had passed the bar in Mississippi. The Wizard of Oz is from Colorado, so we wanted to get barred in Colorado as well. So we moved out to some friends of ours who had decided to travel the coast in one of those pop-top VW vans.
Yeah.
So they left their home empty, and we had no money. And so we were living in downtown Denver, and I was working at Cherry Creek Lululemon.
Nice.
And studying for the Colorado bar. And then there was a weekend. It was Labor Day weekend where we were deciding whether or not we were going to try and live in Denver. And it was really hard because I didn't have any connections work-wise or other. Or we were going to go to DC, and I'd always wanted to do that. So we packed up our 1994 Montero Mitsubishi Sport and the little amount of belongings we had and drove up to DC. And that was over a weekend. And then I worked at the Lululemon at Georgetown there, and I interned. I had to intern again. And that was I felt, because I'd done internships in the past, that I didn't have to do it again. I was past it. And no, I mean, it was a really good lesson, a heavy dose of humility. Maybe you're a newly minted attorney, but you still got to find a way into this really tough market.
Were you interning at an office, like an administrative office, or were you at a
congressman?
Okay. So who was it?
Mike Kaufman.
Okay.
So he represents, or he did previously represented Colorado outside of Denver area. Now he's the mayor. He's still the mayor of Aurora. Is that right? Yeah. So he's still the mayor of Aurora, still in politics, but I worked for him. And
do you like apply for these kind of jobs, or is it just like, hey, you knew this guy and he knew you were?
There's all different ways, and when you go to DC and you ask someone, "How did you get your job?"
So if anybody's listening who knows a lot about politics, I'm gonna ask a lot of stupid questions about politics. So I don't know anything about politics.
That's good. It's and there's policy and politics too. So policy is like the nerd realms where I'm usually at. And then the politics is where you inject money into the equation, and it's all about raising funds and getting elected. And having a combination of both makes you, I think, a very good substantive candidate. But I started in the policy space, and really you can apply, you can go meet. At that time, people were still going around knocking on doors and passing out hard print resumes. So there's all sorts of ways. There's no wrong way. It's just engaging and talking to people. And what I said, I told them, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I will be, you can call me a staff assistant. You can call me, what I wanted to be was a counsel. But it was going to take a while to get there. Yeah. And so just showing up, being ready to work hard. And again, if you have to serve coffee or make copies, that's very humbling.
You grind to do it.
Yeah.
Right?
You just got to get your foot in the door. Then you're going to meet the right people. That's the other thing in DC. You will know that you're on the right path because you'll meet someone. and you can just tell like we're very similar, and they'll see your potential and they'll appreciate it, versus you meet other people that will see your potential and they'll see it as a challenge to whatever their little fiefdom is. You have these weird competitive forces all throughout DC, but it is what it is, and you just get out there and do your best.
With those kind of roles, like what's the career path kind of progression, right? So you come in as an intern and then you become a
staff assistant.
Okay, what does a staff assistant do?
So as you support everyone. You do whatever
you're
asked.
You do whatever's
asked.
Yeah.
So if you're, and I ended up being a staff assistant at a committee in a Senate office, which is different than being a staff assistant in a personal office. So the personal office, you work directly for the member, whether it's the congressman or the senator. And if you're in that role, you're what in Lululemon world we called the DOFI, the director of first impression. So when someone walks in the door, you need to be, hi, welcome to Congressman so-and-so's office. We're so happy you're here. Please fill out this information. So you get their contact information. You can stay in touch. You've probably set up a tour. Sometimes you're a tour guide. I gave a really good tour to this day to the Capitol. I actually loved it because the history is really amazing. And the artwork, I mean, there's just nothing like the U.S. Capitol.
So is that the most senior position working for a congressman?
No, that's like that's the bottom.
Low end,
that's the low. You're only higher than an intern. And the really only differentiating factor is it used to be if you're an intern, you had the red badge of shame, as they called it. Then they've changed the color since. And then you got a real badge, and you got, at the time when I first started, you got a BlackBerry.
So they changed the color to not hurt anybody's feelings?
That happened years ago, but it used to be pretty stark when you were like, you could just tell. It was like the intern with the red badge. But that's like, at the time, it was, I want a real badge, I want a phone, and then you get like a real email address with your name instead of intern1@kaufman.house.gov.
I got a question too. Yeah. How do the DC folks talk about like the district folks, the DC staffers? How do they view the district staffers? Oh,
like in the state, the district staffer? Well, it depends on the office, and a lot of that is driven by the member. So I've been in offices where sometimes there can be weird competition. The district staff feels like the DC staff thinks they're all too important, which is often the case. I mean, the problem with DC, I always say that, is everyone thinks they're a VIP.
Right.
And they're really not.
Yeah,
but
they do.
You know?
I worked for a district office for Kevin Brady for a couple of years, and it always, I mean, there were people out there who were good. I'm not trying to talk shit on anybody, but it did always have that kind of dynamic of like, well, you guys are district people. And it's like, we're actually talking to the constituents that vote for you.
The voters.
It's maybe a stupid question, but what the hell's the difference between these two?
Like the district office is going to be in their district, where like their home state, right?
Okay.
In their area, their constituency.
Yep.
The DC office is obviously in DC, but
it's
I worked
in
at
DC.
the district office. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was a scheduler, but it's like, it was literally whatever you are supposed to do. Like, it's whatever that day dictates. And
the reason I ask is because we had for Empower, we had Ted Cruz come, and the second or the day after, we had put together a little meetup with a bunch of miners and stuff. And he walks in with his entourage of like 1 billion people, and I was like, "What do they all do?
What's everyone do?" Well, see,
what
these
does
are good
everyone do?
questions
Like,
too.
Yeah, what are they doing? Seriously.
Well, so in those instances,
like, why do we need 20 people with one dude coming in? And they're not all security.
Yeah, let me explain the hierarchy. Okay. Yeah, because I do think that's important, because that's like a personal office. Then there's a committee office. I was in a committee, so you're supporting the work of the committee. So it truly is policy focused. And when you're the staff assistant, you're either doing, and you can be elevated to the research assistant, which is the next step, which I was within a matter of months. And but you're researching, finding information. I at the time was working on labor issues. And so I looked up these old floor statements from Senator John F. Kennedy. It was really interesting. And if you ever want to see how cyclical arguments and issues are through Congress, and how, we think it's dysfunctional now, but that's nothing new. And it's interesting to see how people dealt with it. Our only difference is we have all this technology with social media that brings in a new dynamic. But the things we are literally saying are very much the same. There's just, it's interesting, and it's fun to read this in black and white. But you've got the assistant level, then you can be, if you're in the Senate, before you become a legislative assistant, maybe you become a legislative aide, which is somebody who supports a legislative assistant. And the assistants are assigned specific categories of which they are responsible for developing the policies, the response, being the go-to expert. And if you're in a House office, you have like 10 issues because you're spread thin. If you're in the Senate, you're more specialized. You probably have 3 or 4.
Mm.
And then from there, there's a legislative director that oversees all the legislative assistants and basically is in charge of the policy portfolio. And then you have sort of the support structure, the schedulers. The schedulers are some of the most important people because those are the gatekeepers that will either give you access or not to the member. So rule of thumb, always be nice to the schedulers. Like really. I mean, you should be nice to everyone. That gets you really far in DC. But there's that. And then you have people who sit in this role that's part political, which means they can help the member raise money. And then it's part policy. So they know what's going on in the office and then on the floor. You also have people who need to know about parliamentarian process and what's going on. And so those people are your deputy chief of staff and your chief of staff typically. And there's versions of that. But then the committee side, you get even more specialized, which is where I ultimately ended up being, and which is how I ended up becoming very specialized in the realm of environmental policy, environmental law, and specifically the Clean Air Act.
Has it always been? I'm a big fan of Hamilton, right? And so I'm thinking like back in the day,
Oh no.
Like Alexander Hamilton just did all this stuff himself, right? As with everybody else in the government. But now it's like for one person, it's like you have this massive team. Is it like that's just how it has to go these days?
That's how it is. Yeah.
I mean, it's not the same. At least from the outside looking in, it's like, no, it doesn't at all feel like probably Alexander Hamilton, how they had it.
Well, they didn't have staff, they had like a driver for their carriage to the extent they had one. They're very, but it's mind boggling to think about what they did and how impactful and how lasting. You think about the Declaration of Independence and then some of the initial bills of rights and all those conversations, and they were just doing it. But you also think about how they grew up. They were this class. There was very much this, it wasn't written in stone, but this class system where they had access to this education that now anyone who wants to have access can find a way. But back then it was very much, it was very limited.
Yeah. Speaking of Hamilton though, he wrote how many of the Federalist Papers? Like a ton of them. And he was like 20 something. But it's
you think about their age too. Like they were all pretty young.
But they lived to be like 33.
That was
wooden teeth and all that.
Yeah, I'd be in wooden teeth status right now.
I would totally be there.
So what is obviously this is a Bitcoin podcast. What is how did you first get introduced to Bitcoin? And let's walk through your journey with that and then kind of what you're doing after that.
So,
well, real quick, one more.
Yeah.
Because you did end up becoming the chief of staff of the EPA, for the director of the EPA, right?
Yeah.
And
administrator, yes.
But that's a pretty big deal. So you didn't really talk about that. But during that time frame, did any of the Bitcoin stuff come up?
No.
At all?
Well, actually, I'd been told about blockchain technology. So a little bit about chief of staff at EPA. So it was at the time a 14,000 person federal employee agency. And I was in charge of overseeing, there's 11 to 12 offices, depending on how you count, housed in DC in the federal building. And then we have 10 regional offices all across the country. And so it was a combination of knowing what was going on in all of those areas and making sure that our agenda we had set out at the start of the Trump administration, which was a big shift. Again, I could go a little bit into the history, but the role of the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the mission is to protect public health and the environment. And since its true establishment in 1970 under President Nixon, there was a pretty strong commitment to that. And during I'm fast forwarding through a fair amount, but just for brevity's sake, during the Obama administration years, they really turned the EPA into the Democrats' economic policy office as defined by climate change mechanisms, climate change policies. And so EPA had been transformed into this agency where they're trying to do things upon which Congress had never granted them authority and never thought that they would be considering. So when we came in, we wanted to pare that back. We had it back to basics was our branded mission, but it truly was getting the air office to focus on air emissions, water office, water and all that, and then fixing it from there. But it was obviously very controversial. If anyone Googles my name from that time, I mean, you would just think that I've done all sorts of things to pillage the earth and kill all sorts of unsuspecting people.
We know it wasn't you. That was Surya.
It was, that's the Wizard of Oz again. But what we actually did, if you look at the facts and the figures, we made significant improvements. And if just a little point of comparison, when the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency is off trying to be the economic driver of the Democrat Party and quote unquote saving the world from climate change, which is not in their mission, and they don't have the authority to do that, they actually ignore addressing very tangible problems that create harm today, like Flint, Michigan water crisis, the Gold King mine spill. That occurred because resources at EPA were being shifted to chase after that big blue sky thing of which they were not equipped, instead of focusing on their core mission. So we focused on our core mission. We actually drove the ball in the right direction in terms of cleaning up air, cleaning up water, and going into one of the best programs nobody ever hears about unless they're in the environmental space is our Superfund program. And it's basically going into areas that have been plagued by legacy pollution. And it's a major problem. It's usually very complicated. It involves remnants of an industrial past where no one really complied or thought about standards. You can go in and we reformed the program so that they were actually making decisions to clean these projects up. In the past, it had just become a place where good ideas went to die and were just perpetually in this state of process. So we fixed that, and it was so wonderful to see, because if you can address legacy pollution in a meaningful way, you literally change the trajectory of an entire community that for generations has just been dealing in the closest version of abject poverty that we have in this country. Right. So it really is. So we did all of that. And it was a combination of making sure that was on track, knowing what was going on, our 11 offices, our regional offices, and then I worked directly for the administrator. So if we had to go to the White House and a cabinet meeting or whoever, whatever was going on, making sure he was prepped and ready to go, and then sometimes going with him. And the benefit for me is because I grew up, so to speak, in our Office of Air and Radiation, which oversees the implementation of the Clean Air Act and a few other statutes, is that I could often be a substantive policy role in addition to making sure he was saying hello to the right person, follow the decorum, prepped and ready as to what the scope of the conversation was going to be, and bringing in other team members to supplement.
So with obviously the EPA, and jumping back to Bitcoin stuff, but they play a major role in the permitting process, the air permitting process all over the states. I know most states have a DEQ type of agency, so but they're implementing like EPA guidelines and policies, right?
Yeah.
So that does have a big impact on Bitcoin mining, especially the off-grid stuff. Because you were in there from 2016 to
2017 to 2018. I took a break in 2019 and then came back as chief of staff in 2020.
Okay, so during that time, when was the first time you heard Bitcoin mining come up during your time? Never?
I didn't. When I was there, it didn't. I learned about blockchain because some of our transportation guys, there's an office within an office. It's very bureaucratic, called the Office of...
not blockchain, man.
Yeah. No, I know. Yeah, Bitcoin never came up. Right, I learned about blockchain technology because I had to go speak at this forward-looking event. And they wanted me to talk about the potential for blockchain. And they were looking at it in terms of the regulatory state. And so I had one of our transportation gurus come in and explain to me about this decentralized ledger. And anyway, that was it. So I didn't hear anything. Fast forward to summer of 2021, right before I met you.
Yeah.
Because I met you early in my foray into Bitcoin. My former boss, the first administrator of EPA, Scott Pruitt, he called and he had heard, he was familiar with Bitcoin. And we have this relationship where when he has a good idea and he just wants to bounce it off of someone, he'll call me and we'll talk it through. And he had this idea to set up a company to basically procure power purchase agreements that we could, because of the network we had with the utilities and the energy generators, to create good PPAs and then sell those to people in the Bitcoin space.
Right.
And so he called, and Surya was in the car. We had him on, in the car, and the kids are in the back. And he's telling me about Bitcoin. And I was just kind of like, I don't know, I just started a consulting practice, and I just, I'm trying to do all these things. We're trying to figure out our life. We're building a house. We're all this kind of stuff. I was like, you want me to start a business on top of all this in this area about this thing that I know very little about? So then, 2.5 weeks later, I had listened to every single podcast, YouTube, explainer of what is Bitcoin, why it matters, what is the potential. And I had also called my father-in-law. He was the first call I made after I hung up with my former boss. And I asked, because he's a hedge fund investor and does a little bit of VC. And he's always on the cutting edge of technological opportunities because that's how he does a lot of his investments.
And he may be the nicest dude I've ever met in my life. He's like the nicest guy. I'm shocked that he hung out with this dude for a long time. I'm playing Surya.
They're family, so they didn't have a choice.
Yeah, they don't have a choice. But he is such a nice dude.
He's so wonderful. And so I called Brett's his name. I called Brett and I asked him, I was like, have you heard about Bitcoin? And what do you think? He's like, oh, yeah. I think there's some potential there. That's like all he said. And so I went down this deep rabbit hole and learned all that I could and just started talking to people. And one of the early people I talked to as well was Tyler Lindholm.
I was going to bring Tyler up because you said you gave really good tours. What you do? You and Hannah gave me a great tour when I was out there.
That's right.
The best capital tour I can't imagine somebody having a better capital tour than I got from Tyler. I can't talk about how cool it was, but man, it was awesome. It was like midnight too.
He showed you some secret stuff or what?
Oh yeah, dude. I'll tell you when this is over. It was awesome. Go ahead though, my bad.
So Tyler Lindholm, because we had good relationship with Senator Lummis and her staff. And he said, hey, there's 2 companies you should connect with in Wyoming. And I forget the other company, but one of them was Jay.
Right.
And so we reached out to Jay Energy. And I was like, is it Jai?
No,
J-A-I? I don't know. It was a cheer. But anyway, so we met you and we met Ryan. And then it went from there. And really, I'm fast forwarding a lot. And so we can break this down if you want to. But I got really into it, started meeting folks. And I also, one of my other jobs is I'm a backup host for Mississippi's only statewide conservative radio show, Super Talk Mississippi. And part of me coming on board was to bring in different voices about different issues that Mississippians may or may not have been exposed to. And so my husband had connected with Dennis Porter, and we invited him to come on to talk about Bitcoin. And he came on, we had this really great interview, and there was just something about it where I was like, we need to follow up and like connect with him. There's something bubbling underneath the surface here. And we got together and talked about how we saw the landscape with Bitcoin policy, how we saw that there was a gap between what's going on in the federal space and the state and local space. There was a big need and opportunity for someone to engage and try to push policies that benefit the growth and expansion of Bitcoin. We'd had the same thoughts, he out in Washington, us in Mississippi. And so we combined forces, and a few months later, we had come up with Satoshi Action Fund. And so we launched that and hit the ground running.
Yeah, so tell us about that. Like what the goal of Satoshi Action Fund and kind of where you guys plan to go in the future and how it's going to impact a lot of the policy stuff around Bitcoin. Obviously, Bitcoin, there's not a lot of policy governing any of this stuff right now. And so that's part of why I think what you guys are doing is important, was getting the narrative out and making sure that we guide the legislation that is inevitably going to come to be friendly to the industry and kind of embrace like the growth of it. So yeah, tell us about Satoshi Action Fund.
Yeah, it's to educate, inform, and build allies along the process. And what we're trying to do is to create more Texas and less New York is how we say it. Because what's happened in New York is you've had a lot of misinformation land in the laps of people who are making decisions that are of significant consequence to whether or not Bitcoin can grow or not in New York. And that's the permitting. This is where it all comes for full circle in some respects. And so we saw what was going on there. We see what was going on in Wyoming and in Texas. And backing up just a little bit, in Mississippi, we were really interested because of our investments in Jay, and we wanted to expand Bitcoin elsewhere. It made so much sense to bring an industry like that to a place like Mississippi, where I truly think it is a key for rural revitalization. And anyone who's ever heard me talk, I always bring it up because all you need is reliable, affordable energy. You need access to Wi-Fi, and you need a lot of space. And so many of these rural areas, they have all that just sitting there, and it's this untapped resource. And you can bring in something like Bitcoin, where you're creating a lot of residual benefits, but you're also bringing in new economic opportunities into areas where no one no one thinks about something like Bitcoin.
Or like industry has left and
Right.
you repurpose it.
Yeah.
Like there's a ton of that. There's a bunch of examples in Ohio, Texas. Like there's a lot of those examples all over the place.
It's not just Mississippi. So we in working with Jay and trying to bring a little piece of that into Mississippi, we had introduced some legislation at the suggestion of Tyler. We called him and said, hey, if we were going to introduce 3 initial bills around Bitcoin, just trying to build a Bitcoin economy at the state level, what would they be? And so we had a friend of ours who's very experienced, successful lobbyist, get one of his senator friends to introduce these bills. And it kind of blew up in a good way at a very local level. But I think to this day, the Mississippi senator that has had the most retweets and likes on Twitter was Senator Harkins, who introduced the initial round of legislation, him putting it out there and then it getting picked up by the Bitcoin community. But what we found in that process is he introduced the bills. That is like step A of the A through Z process. And so we needed support for people to come out and help educate the staff to the extent, but mostly the members, and then also the other lobby groups, because there's some lobby groups that are buying into misinformation. They see Bitcoin as a threat. And so they're immediately going to try to shut it down. When we did this initially, we really didn't have anyone that was willing to come out and help us. So all of that lent itself to then meeting Dennis, talking about how we need the state organization and being ready to go. So Satoshi Action, the purpose is to develop policies that help the growth of Bitcoin, and not just Bitcoin how it is today. Like it's going to continue to innovate, and we don't even know the full potential of it. But allowing for that to happen, but having a clear path for engagement at the local and state level, so that it can grow. Those who are part of it can continue to innovate. And then expand access to the residual benefits. So there's the policymaking component, there's the education and informing component. We always prioritize making this bipartisan. Again, my experience working on climate issues as a Republican in the Trump administration, some issues get to a point where they are so entrenched. The idea that something substantive and helpful will actually come out of any negotiated process, it's not great. Right. And so you want to avoid Bitcoin from becoming entrenched. And so we're very careful to engage with all spectrums of political parties, all spectrums of ideological thought, and bringing them and building a strong coalition of allies that not only understand Bitcoin and what it's doing today, but see the potential and want to make sure that, fear or threat or whatever it may be, a lot of red herring arguments don't unnecessarily get in the way of it. Right. So again, more Texas, less New York.
Yeah. We actually were talking about New York yesterday when we had Marto on here, and how I think at this point, El Salvador is a safer investment for Bitcoin related opportunities than New York, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. It's remarkable, but that's a reality. And I noticed when I went to DC with you guys last year, or I guess early this year, whatever it was it? I don't even remember now.
I don't remember. Was that last year?
I honestly don't remember.
A while ago.
I think it was this year, but anyway.
It is December. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I just realized that was really revealing to me, because again, we do talk in the echo chamber a lot where we're talking with the same people over and over, and this stuff seems so normal and just kind of, everybody knows it. When I got out there, it was really revealing how much they don't know anything about it. And what they do know about it is literally just things they've heard or come from, like, the energy consumption use is the big one that I think a lot of, frankly, those on the left are really hang on to and kind of paint a bad picture about Bitcoin because of the energy consumption. But it's such a lack of understanding of how that energy consumption can translate into like better quality of life for people all around, not just in the US, but people all around the globe. And we're starting to see more countries get more involved with it. A lot of African countries are starting to do a lot. Obviously, El Salvador and a lot of Central American countries are starting to really look at how implementing Bitcoin into your like economy can benefit them. And then I think when you expand on that and bring mining into it in particular, that's real infrastructure growth potential for a lot of these different areas. But that's why I think what you guys are doing is important, because those things should be apolitical. They benefit, they fit in line with the agenda for people on the left and the right. And so it's like, this is something that we really do need to keep apolitical and keep it to where this is truly based on facts and like the benefit that Bitcoin mining brings to people all around the globe. And we've had Marshall Long on here. He was talking about one of the issues or one of the opportunities they got going on in Africa right now, and literally building out grid infrastructure for these, villages basically where people have not had reliable power and they've only had power for like 2 or 3 hours a day. And so that's the stories and the rhetoric I think we need to, I don't like calling it rhetoric, but it's true, but we need to get out more. And that's why, as much as like a lot of the Bitcoin folks don't want to have, government involved, and it's more this like sovereign libertarian type of streak, which I'm all about too. I think the reality is that regulation will come and that we need to have reasonable, rational regulation rather than just kind of pretending that that's not going to come. I think it's coming regardless. And so, yeah, I'm glad that you guys have got this organization.
So together. We understand the mission. How do you guys go and make that impact in Washington? Is it through, I know you guys have the website and things like that, and we do like the dinners, which was fantastic. Is it a lot of one-on-one kind of smaller meeting with regulators? Is it, hey, you're kind of putting together groups of 20 to 50 people and you're trying to educate at scale? Is it content? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I really wish Dennis were here because he is.
He's coming on in March.
Oh, good. Okay, perfect. So he can talk all about this, but we actually stay out of DC as much as possible. I mean, we just by virtue of my work past and my husband's work past, we've got those connections. And so we work closely with the digital chamber, mostly because a lot of our friends are there in terms of keeping a pulse of what's going on in DC and engaging when necessary. But we go to state lawmakers. We work with groups like ALEC, and you have initial meetings directly. It's usually directly with the member because they don't have staff when you're talking about a state house or a Senate house. It's hosting Twitter Spaces events. And Dennis is really, really great at leveraging social media to bring anyone and everyone in. And the easy thing about this space is people are very curious and they want to know. It's not like we're coming in with something that people have never heard of. They've heard of it, and whether it's good or bad, we're not quite sure, but they've at least heard of it and they're curious. Right. And so Dennis has been really, really great at just reaching out, talking to anyone and everyone. And it really is, it's meeting after meeting. And then a lot of members, if they see it, they see the potential and they can understand it for whatever their goal may be, whether it's making the grid resilient, returning it to a state of resilience, I should say. If it's counteracting the intermittency of renewables, if it is addressing orphaned and abandoned oil wells, or maybe it is that rural revitalization, whatever it is, then we have model legislation that we've developed. We don't have all of those pieces covered, but we've got a couple. I would say that the one furthest along is the abandoned and orphaned oil wells legislation. And we give them that model policy and work with them to the extent they have a team, and then figure out how do they introduce and then plot out what's going to be the course to getting this across the finish line. And what we've been doing now since we've launched, we've been starting a startup, which I know both of you are very familiar with, but it's a lot of letting people know about us, getting the word out. So we've been doing some media engagement. And so I've got a lot of those relationships with Politico and Wall Street Journal. And then Dennis, because of his podcast that he had, Smart People Shit, and then it became the Dennis Porter Show. He knows a lot of folks in the Bitcoin space. And so it's a combination of earned media and getting the word out, meeting with donors and raising funds. I mean, we've really been focused on raising funds, which is why the big dinner we had not too long ago was a way to get everyone who's been a part of it to thank them and then keep the growth going.
Yeah, that's good. That is good. It was a great dinner too, by the way. I thought you guys did a good job on that. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Drink a lot.
Drink a lot.
Yeah, hey, I mean.
Yeah, drink a whole lot, actually. Yeah, it was good.
That whole week.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, it was.
It always
rough,
helps.
man. It does help.
What did it? You get like 45 of like your closest Bitcoin friends together.
I know,
in a
and then it
place
gets so
over like
small.
3 days.
Yeah.
You know, and
it's
then
such a small industry that I mean, everybody's buddies, and so you end up partying pretty hard. It feels like oil and gas, like
it really does.
tons.
It was kind of like TBC Summit felt like Nape.
Yeah, it did.
Right.
Like a cooler Nape, actually. Nate needs some help, in my opinion.
I know.
Just saying. But have you guys been to Nape?
I haven't.
This is
I bet Dennis has. I
so
bet.
it'd actually not be a bad place for you guys to probably set something up, just because there's so much oil and gas like folks that come.
Mhm.
Obviously, it's a big oil and gas event, but
It's the most prolific upstream oil and gas
Right.
event because it's based around deals. Like
Mhm.
that's where you used to go to like buy or sell oil and gas properties. It's debatable whether that actually happens at the conference, but it is still an excuse for everybody to get away from the wife and kids for 3 days
It
and
turns
go
into a big
hang
old party.
out at the Four Seasons.
Right.
And then a million different after parties that a lot of the
Yeah.
members are putting on. It's
That sounds
It's a
great.
good-
I
it's
mean,
fun.
yeah, develop those relationships that you're
Right.
going to need to actually
Well,
get those deals done.
Yeah.
And from a aspect of like companies that are looking to get rid of some of their shut-in wells or low producers or legacy stuff, it's like it's a good opportunity. And so
Well, that's good. And I'll say Dennis has been really good about going to different events and representing Satoshi Action. We're slated for Empower. So coming to speak. And again, it's just this industry, it's small and it's all about developing those meaningful relationships, letting people know what you're doing and inviting them or giving them the opportunity to engage to make it better one way or the other. And that's the thing about our model legislation too. It truly is. It is a template that can be adjusted to deal with whatever the specialized issues are in New Hampshire to Mississippi to Louisiana, all the way out west.
Are you guys you mentioned some of the legislation. Are you doing anything with like, I know we briefly talked about it, but like the DCCPA, the Digital Commodity Consumer Protection Act? It's the one that it got proposed, I think, in 2021, but there's been a lot of kind of back and forth on it and amendments and changes to it. There was a big issue with whether or not miners were going to be considered like broker dealers on it.
Right.
And I think that's gotten resolved. But now with the FTX stuff happening, and SBF was a big proponent of this bill. Like, do you see or have any idea on what's going to happen to that bill now that all this FTX shit has happened?
So the bill was proposing that miners had to be broker dealers themselves.
Well, there was some loose language around it, and I think they've clarified that portion of it to where miners will not be considered like broker dealers from a KYC issue, right?
Do you want to explain really quickly why that's a major headache?
Well, yeah. Well, number one, because there's no way for us to report that. Like it would have been, there's virtually no way for a miner to, sorry, my bad. There's virtually no way for a miner to be able to accommodate what that language was going to require. And so you would in effect be in violation of this legislation just from the get-go because of how loose the definition was. That I do think has been resolved, but there's been a lot of debate now that I've seen from people that because SBF was so involved with pushing for that legislation and he was donating a lot to different members that were sponsors of that bill.
Right.
So I've wanted to see, like, is there going to be much change to that bill now that SBF and FTX has went down, and I guess kind of his involvement of it and the viewpoint of it from some of the people on the outside that are still learning about, well, crypto in general, but Bitcoin in particular, and like, how is this going to get impacted now?
Yeah, I think it's certainly complicated the development of that bill and how long it'll ultimately take to get something that everyone can agree with and live with across the finish line. And I'll say this on FTX, what I've told a few folks, because what we've been doing with Satoshi Action is also engaging some of the groups that aren't directly involved. They are more so now, but the utilities, for example, and some of those associations. And so when I met with them, it was literally the week all this broke. And I just said, don't judge the Bitcoin industry on FTX and SBF in the same way you wouldn't judge the entirety of the Texas electricity system off of Enron.
Right.
These are fraudsters, and fraudsters exist in every industry. And people are trying to paint paint FTX as representative of the entire industry, and that is the exception. And there's a lot of good people who've been working on this for a long time. But setting that aside, the federal legislation, it's going to take a long time. And so this is why with Satoshi Action, we're focusing at the state level, because we can get meaningful legislation done in a year, if not less than that, because most state assemblies don't meet year round. Some do, but some don't. But they're going to come in, it's just easier to get policies across the finish line. There's less people to appease or deal with. You can have direct conversations. You could literally sit around a table, bring everyone who may be impacted by a policy or anyone that's concerned about it, have that conversation, and everyone can walk away either understanding what it is and be willing to support or be neutral. Is always ideal. And then if they're going to oppose, they're going to oppose. But it's smaller. It takes less money, less resources to actually get that stuff across the finish line. So I say all that. We indirectly engage with the federal space because of who we are, who we know, and the fact that people see us as, oh yeah, I've got a friend that does like Bitcoin. Let me call Mandy. She knows something about this. That's a lot of the conversations I have with staff that's on Capitol Hill saying like, I'm not very familiar with this. I know you're involved some way. Can you give me the 101? I want to ask the dumb questions, but people need to ask the dumb questions to have a baseline understanding. So it's going to take a while. It's going to get more complicated. It's going to be very important for the Bitcoin industry to stand up and say what I just said, which I think they have been, but that guy's the exception and he doesn't represent who we are, and he should not impede the potential for this technology to provide all the solutions we've already thought about and beyond. So that's going to be very important. That's going to take a long time. And in the meantime, we are going to be building a firewall of really good, thoughtful policies based off of substantive conversations with people in the field who've been doing this for a long time. And whether they're in the field on Bitcoin, on oil and gas, on utilities, on economic developers, whoever it may be, we've talked to those people. We didn't just talk to their representative in Washington, D.C. at the law firm, which is 4 degrees removed from getting down to the hard facts and figures you need to build out really good legislation or policies. So we are doing that. And we're building that firewall against anything that could potentially impede or disrupt the growth of this industry coming from Washington, D.C. or some of these federal agencies. Because as the federal agencies develop rules and regulations, some of that's going to get challenged. It's going to get all called up in the legal system, and that takes a long time as well. And so that unfortunately prevents comprehensive certainty from happening. But in the meantime, we have all of these state initiatives that are going to be. You
got little helpers.
Sorry, my kids are apparently on the loose.
That's good. At least it's contained area. We've got padded walls here. Let's just let them in. Just not next to those electrical circuits.
And I know you guys are doing more on the state level, but from the federal level, what do you think would be the biggest things to, I guess, provide clarity for institutional level money and investors to be coming into the space?
Yeah.
What's up, dude?
Hey.
Y'all are obviously not being watched.
This is a really great playground.
It's okay, buddy. It's all right, dude.
You're so cute.
So sorry, guys.
So polite.
I hope that was on camera.
I hope that was too.
I'm so sorry, guys. Seriously.
Maybe not.
Yeah, it's got to stay in.
Everyone in this room has young children.
Okay, y'all keep going. Let me.
Okay, all right.
Yes, from the federal level, what do you think can help from a clarity standpoint, like whether it be tax legislation or clarity on just how Bitcoin will get treated?
Yeah.
What do you think needs to happen?
Well, I think from an investment side, that definition of what's a security versus what is a commodity, I mean, that's very fundamental as to what regulatory space am I as either an owner or an investor in Bitcoin going to be in. So I do think that's important. A lot of that has worked its way out, and I admittedly haven't paid as closely attention, so couldn't read in all the details, but on a fundamental level, because so much, it's a new industry, so much is about investors being willing to invest. I think that's going to be important. I think shaking the reputational damage that SBF has caused, even though he is an outlier, and we understand that, for some people, the only thing they've really heard that they can understand about Bitcoin is the FTX SBF situation. And so that's going to be really important just from a reputational perspective. And then the tax side, I wish my husband would come on and talk about it, because this is his area of expertise.
He's more than welcome.
I know. He's super resistant, but Bitcoin is double taxed in a lot of applications, and there's nothing more damaging to the growth of an industry than overly expensive taxation. And I think figuring that out will be really important. And what we're up against in this space, again, I'm repeating things I've heard at my kitchen table, but it's essentially the way that the IRS and the taxing mechanism is created is to keep these issues in tax court and away from real court, because they can prevent broad sweeping precedent from being set that we as the owners of this value actually want. And so there's going to be this battle to keep everything as sidebar conversations settled with whatever agents working on it, whatever subcomponent of tax court is, versus getting it out into the broader courts and then defining what is taxable and what isn't in the Bitcoin and then larger cryptocurrency space. Yeah.
So I did see on that DCCPA, they are defining Bitcoin as a commodity in there. Will that clarify things on the tax side at all, if it is defined as that?
No.
No.
The tax experts, I'm like, it wouldn't lie, but no, the tax expert is shaking his head. So I will say this, because I don't want to get caught saying a lot of things that are totally wrong. And
I have no problem saying a bunch of things that are totally wrong. So.
But you don't have to deal with your husband, the Wizard of Oz, calling you out for it. But all that being said, I think some degree of clarity and certainty in that space, as with any industry, will be very important. Otherwise, you're susceptible to the whims of the IRS bureaucrat. And now there's 87,000 new ones coming on board, and no one wants them meddling with the growth of this industry.
Who was like, this sounds like a great idea. You know what? 87,000 more people in the IRS.
I don't want to get into it because we keep things apolitical.
I know. Yeah. I have lots of thoughts, but I will just tune in to Super Talk Mississippi, and I'll tell you what I really think. Okay, it's the conservative statewide radio show, and
speaking of Mississippi and statewide, so you're running for office now. So you're gonna go from being behind the scenes with another behind the scenes guy behind you to now one of the candidates out there. Yeah. And so, what office is it? And tell us. Was there like a Mandy Gunasekara public commissioner website?
Yeah, it's Mandy for Mississippi.
Okay.
We went with that
That's
because
an easy one.
Guns for Gunasekara was going to be a little bit complicated.
I know. I never know where to put the E or an A.
It's okay.
There's one in there that always throws me off, man. So.
I misspell it from time to time myself. And we've been married for 13 years. So Mandy for Mississippi, I'm running for public service commissioner. And this is really important in a lot of ways because the public service commissioner has oversight of the utilities. So electricity rates, water, wastewater, the affiliated infrastructure.
So Bitcoin related even. Yeah.
Very Bitcoin related. And also oversight of pipeline safety. We have a lot of natural gas pipelines that run through Mississippi, and the build out of telecom and broadband. So the fundamentals of whether or not your economy is in a position to grow or deal with and be distracted by fundamental problems. And so I'm running for PSC, and I'm representing the northern districts, so the top third of the state if you were to split it into 3 districts, because this is an area where there is a ton of growth, and we have this amazing potential in Mississippi. But if you don't have the fundamental right, if you're not building your house on rock, you're building it on sand, you're not going to do well. So I want to make sure we're building everything on rock and going up from there. And the other piece of this, the personal piece, I'm from Mississippi. I went to DC and worked for a couple years, but coming back, and I hear so many people say this, they want to live in Mississippi. I mean, if you're from there, there's nothing like it. It's your family, it's your home. It's just a wonderful, wonderful way of life. But we have not been as successful in the growth of modern career opportunities. And really, to engage in the modern economy, what do you need? You need affordable, reliable energy, and you need broadband or access to the internet. Energy and the internet is what I say. And so if we can do that, that will make it easier for everyone who's left the state that wants to come back to find their place back in Mississippi where they can do what they love to do, but they can do it in the place that they love as well. And so I always say this, Mississippi, we don't have a Huntsville or a Nashville or some of these southern cities that have really grown up because they've embraced the potential and integrated the potential of a modern economy in their everyday local workings. I'm going to change that. And we've got this great growth in part because we're south of Memphis and there's just a ton of transportation and commerce that occurs there. But I really want to amplify that. So there's no longer this brain drain. People like my kids grow up and they want to live in Oxford, Mississippi or South Haven because that is the exciting city in the South where they can grow their careers and live out their opportunities, but also be around friends and family and live the way of life that they absolutely love. So I'm running for PSC. And a part of it too, what I've made as a part of my platform is the role of Bitcoin in creating a resilient grid.
That was going to be my next question is, have you made that a platform issue? Okay.
So if you go to my issues, I've got 5 listed and one of them is innovative grid. And basically talking about, look, in Mississippi, we can bring in these new energy technologies. We can bring in renewables where it ultimately makes sense. But if we're going to do that, then we need to do it smart in a very smart way. And the smartest way is this private sector created amazing technology that levels out not only the energy discrepancies, but also the value investment. You can level out the fluctuating load with Bitcoin miners, and then you also are generating value that ultimately I would like to see return to the ratepayers. And we've been building out policies, talking to some of the utilities to figure out how we can ultimately do that. But I plan to do that in Mississippi, and I just think it'll be extremely beneficial because there's no structural barriers that stand in the way because Bitcoin miners can go anywhere. And you got to plug them in and you got to connect. And so if those fundamentals are taken care of, we can really take off.
Yeah. What is the grid makeup there? Is it mostly like
natural gas? It's mostly natural gas.
Okay.
Yeah, it's mostly natural gas.
So it's reliable.
Yeah. Very reliable.
Sorry.
Although increasingly expensive because of ideological preferences of the current administration trying to suppress the development of domestic energy resources in the way y'all are familiar with as well.
Yeah, we are. But it's always good for prices. Every time I want them to get in. I've told people that for years. I'm like, it's the worst thing in the world. I mean, prices go up and we'll hire more people. So it's not all terrible.
But the last thing I'll say about public service commissioner, and this could probably be said, there's a degree of political complacency in areas where people have just accepted the status quo. And the person I'm potentially running against has been in office since 2007, promising energy and internet for a long, long, long time. And it hasn't really delivered in the way that is going to be necessary for Mississippi, northern Mississippi in particular, to really take off. And what I learned in the Trump administration, if you come in, you stay focused on your goals, and it's all about implementing that instead of, creating unnecessary roles or building out bureaucracies or things along those lines, you can get a lot of stuff done in a relatively short amount of time. And so the status quo is no longer acceptable, not even in a place like rural Mississippi. And I'm telling people about that, showing them what I can do and how, the rising tides lift all boats. And there's certainly a lot of boats that need to be lifted in Mississippi.
If they get stuff done, what do they run on next, though? I mean, so you got to kind of perpetuate the problems, right?
I hate that. Maybe we get rid of them. Hey, there's a good. What about that idea? We thought about that.
I'm all good with that. I'm all good with that. But yeah, I like what you guys are doing. I like Dennis, and I think that the Satoshi Action Fund is something that we need. I know there's been some other like smaller kind of federal level lobbying groups that have popped up, but with your guys' backgrounds and kind of the knowledge base that the people you're bringing in to the Satoshi Action Fund, it's like, that's what we need. We need some good advocates for the industry to help educate the lawmakers because, I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not a big political person anymore, but man, it can be eye-opening when you talk to some of them and just how lost they are. Like Tyler's really important to have in an office because he's very, very knowledgeable on this stuff. And Obviously, Senator Lummis is big for the whole industry. So we need more of that, and it's good. So glad you guys are doing it.
No, we're excited about it, and genuinely passionate about the technology and what it can do, and then see the potential in all sorts of applications. I will say it's important for folks to understand when they go, whether you're talking to someone in DC or at the state level, the reason they don't know a lot about Bitcoin or understand the fundamentals, it's because they're dealing with everything else in the world at the same time. They're dealing with budgets. They're dealing with, if you're in DC, they just had to deal with the monstrosity of a $1.7 trillion end of the year spending bill after all of these other issues. And so even when you're going and you're talking to the staffer, let's say you're talking to the telecom staffer, or maybe it's the telecom and the ag staffer, because, it's a reflection of even in DC, when you're talking to the policy experts, they don't know where this exactly fits in. They're dealing with 8 to 10 to 12 other very equally complex substantive issues. And so it's important to find a way to simplify what we're talking about, show why it's important because of the things that they or their boss cares about and how it can make a difference. And what we do is we come in and we try to make that easy. This is what it is. You can trust us as a resource. And if your boss is interested in getting on board with this, here's some sample pieces of legislation that it's not from us. It's not just from us. It has the thumbprint and the impact from the people who are in the field and have been doing this for a very long time.
Yeah. I agree with that. It's good. I think it's needed. And yeah, I'm happy about it. You got any other questions on it?
My mind's blown all this politics stuff. It's like a totally different world that I just don't understand.
I've full disclosure, I have completely stopped watching any politics. I hardly watch the news at all. I'm probably getting my news from sources that are probably not the most reliable all the time. But
I get my news pretty much from Instagram stories at this point, because I deleted Facebook and Twitter and all that.
Yeah, that's basically what I do too. And but it's one of those things where if you stick your head in the sand too long, you pull it out and you're like, holy shit, what's happened? And so, it's important to have advocates in there that are knowledgeable on the issues and staying in tune and communicating with miners in particular to make sure that we're getting fair representation and strong advocates for what we need to happen.
Yep.
Yeah.
Energy policy is a big deal. And the whole world's seeing that right now. Yeah. This is going to be it's going to become a bigger issue over time too. So, yeah. I
was listening I had to do a Fox Business hit the other day where they were talking about the rolling blackouts. And it's really interesting. This is the first time in modern history, I believe. I mean, someone could fact check me, but it makes sense that our grid has become less resilient. And it's just so crazy. And it shows you that if the wrong policies are implemented for distorted reasons, it has very severe and real consequences. And we've been talking about this for a long time, but now it's playing out. You have people doing without power during extreme weather events when they need it the most. And that's unacceptable. And it is a policy choice. It's not because there's a deficiency in the technology.
Right.
And Bitcoin can solve so many of those problems, again, from a resiliency perspective, but also from an environmental perspective. We didn't get into that very much, but
that's a big deal though. And that's the part that drives me nuts, because it's like this Bitcoin mining, look at the potential to remove emissions from the oil and gas activity.
Significant.
That should be something that the left is just applauding and embracing. And that energy consumption should be that's a good consumption of energy. That is a good thing on both sides. Nobody should have a problem with that. Same with the renewable grid infrastructure build out that the Bitcoin mining allows people to do, and allows them to do it economically instead of through subsidies the whole time. So it's these are all real world cases that you can demonstrate the effectiveness of them. You can point to examples of them. I've got a client who just closed a deal in Utah, all solar. They'll be buying off the grid when at night and whatnot. But this solar was completely stranded from any type of offtake, at least for the levels that of power that it's going to generate. Well, down the line, that likely will be tied into the grid, and it will be supplying the grid. But it wouldn't have been built, and really there was no offtake for it other than Bitcoin mining. And so, it's one of those things that this should be studied in a lot more detail from the people that are making these policy decisions. And if they do, and if they're intellectually honest with themselves, there's really only benefits that come from this. I don't see any negatives that come from any of this stuff. So but that's unfortunately not.
We're all out here doing the Lord's work, man. Just doing it in Mississippi. We're holding down the podcast. We got Empower coming back in 23.
All kinds of stuff.
We're out here just spreading the gospel,
news, man.
23 is going to be a really great year.
It'd be really cool if Bitcoin's price would blow up again, but that'll happen.
Yeah,
that'll happen. That's actually something this whole SBS stuff is really pointed out. Is like, look, all the Bitcoin that people thought they're getting all the time, like it's a lot harder to get Bitcoin than what you think. You may go buy it on an exchange and you got it sitting there.
It's all paper Bitcoin.
It's paper Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. It's not real Bitcoin. And so this in the long run, I think could really show people how imperative it is that you take your stuff off of centralized exchanges. Don't leave them on there because it's not real. And hopefully that is what people start to learn over the next years. Like, okay, this is...
Justin rolls right into. And this episode is brought to you by Ledger.
I know. Ledger and Unchained. Yeah. So I'll stop. But yes. Thank you for coming on, Mandy. We appreciate it. Thank you, Surya, for hiding in the background like a weirdo. It's all right.
Yeah.
Oh,
We
are.
I trust Unchained with my Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Unchained, they're great. They're not a sponsor of the show. They should be though soon. but yes, we are big fans of Unchained. So.
I will end with this too. If anyone's interested in learning more about my race and my campaign, and when they want to read what I've put up, go to mandy.ms.
Mandy.ms, not Mandy for Mississippi.
Mandy.ms is the website for Mandy for Mississippi.
Okay.
So you could Google that.
Don't go to Mandy.com.
Yeah, don't go to Mandy.com. Okay. I've heard varying degrees of what that may or may not be. I've never tried it with an I. By the way, it's Mandy with a Y.
I was just saying,
I've never tried it with an I.
.ms. Type carefully.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Thanks, Mandy. It's been fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Likewise.
Yeah, appreciate it, guys. Thank you.